Okay, at this time I'd like to call to order the Carson City Audit Committee. Could we take the roll call now?
Chairperson Bertrand.
Here.
Vice Chair Prowse.
Here.
Member Bagwell.
Present.
Member Sonata.
Here.
Member Leonard.
Here.
A quorum's present.
Thank you. At this time, the public is invited to comment on and discuss any topic that is relevant to or within the authority of the Carson City Audit Committee. In order for members of the public to participate in the committee's consideration of an agenda item, the committee strongly encourages members of the public to comment on an agenda item during the item itself. No action may be taken on a matter raised under public comment unless the item has been specifically included on the agenda as an item upon which action may be taken. Okay, at this point, is there a motion to accept and approve the minutes?
Ask for the public comment.
Oh, any public comment? I'm sorry. Any public comment at this time? Guess not. We're so used to not having any comment from the public. Thank you. Okay, approval of the minutes. Is there a motion to accept the minutes?
Also move. I'll second.
All those in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Okay, minutes approved. At this time, is there a motion to adopt the agenda?
So moved.
Second.
Okay, good.
All those in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Okay, the agenda is adopted. Okay, item number 6 here, going on to 2014 CAFR. Just briefly, a little background here. Staff and external auditor is, I guess somebody from Kafori Armstrong is going to be here to answer any questions regarding the ID Bailey. Yeah. It's going to be a while before I get that out of my. You guys still have the same face, you know. ID Bailey to discuss the 2014 CAFR, and so at this time I'd like to ask if somebody from ID Bailey would like to open it up and.
Actually, I can go ahead and start, Mr.
Okay,
Chairman.
go right
For the
ahead.
record, Nick Providenti, Carson City Finance Director. So what we did is we were provided a list of questions by the committee regarding the 2014 CAFR. So what I'd like to do is just kind of go through them kind of briefly, and if you had any other questions, you know, some of them are pretty highly technical accounting issues that I'm not sure that we want to get into, but we can kind of touch upon them, and if you have any other additional questions, we could either, you know, figure something out between us or get back with you at the next meeting. So the first question was, were there any changes in accounting practices and policies noted during the 2014 audit? So basically, you know, we kind of have the answer here. Per note 1 in the CAFR, the city implemented GASB 65 items previously reported as assets and liabilities, which require governments to adopt provisions of concept statement number 4. So it talks a little bit about that, and also in fiscal 14, the basic financial statements have been adjusted in accordance with GASB statement number 63 and 65. So, I mean, you can basically read that. I'm not sure that we really want to go too much into that, but you know, again, we can answer more questions if you had any questions. Number 2, are there any upcoming accounting standards that will require Carson City to change its policies? So again, we're talking about GASB 68, which will be accounting and financial reporting for pensions, effective for fiscal year 15. So it's kind of a cost sharing issue. And I don't know if, Dan, if you wanted to kind of talk a little bit more about that, about how things are going with PERS and, you know, how that's coming along.
Yes, yeah. For the record, Dan Carter, engagement partner on the city's external audit. And we had kind of talked about that in our exit conference last year. The city will have to implement GASB 68 in fiscal year 15. And I think the issue that we have run into at this point is that it requires NV PERS. They have all the information to provide to each of the municipalities in the state, as well as the breakdown of each person's piece of the liability for NV PERS. PERS actually implemented GASB 67, which is the preceding standard last year, the standard that relates to plans. And then 68 will be implemented by all of our local governments this year that relates to employers. I know NV PERS has said that they can't fund the audit of those numbers with participant money. So there was kind of a hang-up as far as who was going to pay for PERS auditors, which is Clifton Larson Allen, to audit these balances so that each of us don't have to go to PERS and do our own audits of, the city's information that PERS provides. So I know they were trying to figure out the funding of that, and I know everything was kind of on hold until the legislature ended. So we're hoping that Clifton Larson Allen will start that right away so that we can get that information in time. It may be a slight hang-up in getting the audit done this year if that information doesn't come out soon enough for us to audit it. But from a big picture perspective, it's kind of similar to a couple years back, we put the OPEB liability on the books. This is kind of the same thing, but it's for your pension liability. It's your piece of PERS, basically.
So basically, for the record, if you could explain that to us, what's now going to start happening in 2015, a portion of the unfunded liability is going to be appearing on the financial statements, and that amount, the question is who's auditing that, whether they're going to audit it and you're going to rely on that versus ID Bailey having to audit that number.
Exactly, yeah. I think the plan's in place for Clifton Larson Allen to audit those schedules and provide them out to the government. It's just PERS isn't going to pay for it, and they were trying to come up, the state controller's office had started the initiative to try and come up with a plan to get all the local governments, in line to pay their piece of it. And that, I think, is still waiting to be determined.
I'm kind of wondering, is that why, isn't it, if they audit the numbers, do they have to actually look to see what the particular portion is for Carson City? Or if they audit it, they can just figure out, hey, you guys, our funding rate is what, 71% right now, and your cost of that. But does it really vary? If it's 71%, does it really vary from city to city that much?
Absolutely.
It does,
yeah,
okay.
I think it's based on,
Based on the actuary information,
Yeah.
based on, yeah, okay, gotcha.
and the city's employees. Yeah.
Okay, yeah, so it is a pretty complex,
Definitely.
yeah, June 30th, yeah. Okay, great, thank you.
If I could ask, we've got, if I understand it, two pension components, one being the PERS pension component, the other personnel employee benefits, and PERS does not get involved in those? Or
Yeah, the OPEB is not a pension issue. That's just, it's just medical insurance, basically.
Okay, well, all
So it's
pension
two
stuff goes into this one through
Right.
PERS.
Correct.
Right. But that other side would be cost to the city.
Correct.
Yeah.
That's totally different than the pension.
Okay.
Right. And we'll address that, I think.
Yes. So this is the only one really issue that the city's going to run into relative to GASB 68.
Correct.
Okay, thank
Okay.
you.
Any other questions on that one? No.
There we go.
Okay, the next one talks about a deferred loss on refunding and what was the rationale for refunding that resulted in a loss. Well, basically, the refunding didn't result in a loss, so this is just kind of a complex accounting issue. So what we did is we did an advanced refunding, and we had to actually borrow a little bit more money than we actually defeased on the debt. So that's kind of where you have the $3.4 million difference. The actual savings, the interest rate savings was a total of $1,475,000 over the life. That's the present value of the savings. So that takes into account having to borrow a little bit more money because the interest rate savings was so great. So we amortize that savings every year, and that reduces the actual interest rate savings that we have, but we still have interest rate savings, and it's still $1,475,000. Does that make sense? I think we explained that to the board when we were actually doing the transaction. I don't know that they understand it. It's pretty complex, but really what we had to do is because typically when you borrow money, you can't. They have call features in them that are 10 years, and you can't refund them till after 10 years. But it made economic sense for us to refund them a little bit earlier because the interest rates were so low. So we had to borrow a little bit more money, put it in the escrow account. Now the escrow account is paying that till the 10 years is up. And the escrow amounts are, they're earning so little money, it just made economic sense for us to do that. So we do all this analysis. I mean, I think we spend a lot of time, I know my staff spend a lot of time with Dan, working out the journal entries and those types of things. But basically, generally accepted accounting principles is what that is.
So just so I can clarify, what you're indicating, even though we borrowed more money, it was prudent because the interest rate was so much lower,
Correct.
it actually recovered the excess dollars plus interest.
Correct. Yeah,
And we
the
came
actual,
out.
yeah, the actual economic, I think on
Okay. That's
one of the
on
pages that Nancy had put in there
Number
indicated
3.
that there was like 1,475,000. And I have the document too, if anybody wants to see that, the actual financial, document that was prepared by the financial advisors with the whole transaction in it, so.
It's just hard to understand that your debt went up, but your
Right.
costs went down. So the
Correct.
interest rate was
So much lower.
so much lower that it
Right.
actually covered the excess borrowing.
Exactly.
Okay, thank you.
Exactly. Does that make sense?
One of the things I came across was that, would it be wrong to say that the accounting records focus on the principal amounts and don't focus so much on the interest impact and don't reflect the interest savings until closer to the years that they actually occur?
Yeah, I think that's fair. I mean, basically, when you think about the transaction, if you think about you have $10 million on the books, and really what you did is you borrowed $11 million and you defeased the 10, so there's that 1 million somewhere. So you have the $11 million now on the books, and you got rid of 10, so that $1 million is kind of the loss on the refunding. So you're amortizing that over the life of the debt. But even with amortizing all that, compared it to the savings of the interest, you still have an economic gain of, over almost $1.5 million.
Right.
So
Okay, that helps a
it's
lot.
accounting versus economics, basically, or reality, yeah. So, does that make sense? I think.
Thank you.
I mean, that was a hard one for us to try to explain, so I hope we did it okay. So, okay, number 4, unrestricted funds are at a deficit of 27.6. Again, we've got 4 basic components of that. We have the net OPEB obligation, which I think we'll kind of talk about in a little, on question number 8 of about $13.4 million. We have a balance of $10,425,000 in V&T historical bonds. So typically when you borrow money, you use it to build something and you have an asset. Well, in this case, we borrowed that money and we actually gave the money away. We granted it to the V&T so they can, purchase right-of-way, I think is probably what they did with it. So there's no real corresponding asset with the debt. So that's kind of the main reason why, a lot of that $10.4 million of that is basically at a deficit.
Well, I guess my question is, so what's the corresponding entry to that? If you've got this deficit, there'd be some kind of intangible benefit? I mean, how does that balance on the financial
Well,
statements?
it wasn't an asset.
Yeah.
So basically what we did is we borrowed money, so we got the debt and we got the cash, but there wasn't any fixed asset. So what we ended up doing is we gave away the cash, and I think we showed it as an expense at that time. It was a grant expense, right?
So it was all expense.
Right.
So it was all expensed in one shot. It wasn't
Exactly.
amortized or anything like
Exactly.
that.
Yeah.
Would I be totally incorrect to reference this as a de facto grant?
That's exactly what it was. Yeah,
Okay.
it was a grant it was another local government grant to the V&T. Right.
I have a question just to follow up on that. So I presume that these bonds are being serviced by the 0.1% sales
Correct.
tax?
That's correct.
So that 0.1% is going to service debt, it's not going to the V&T Commission?
Correct. Right. That is correct. And then the last 2 components are the landfill closure, post-closure number of 3.3 million and compensated absences of about 5.7 million.
Nick, can you explain what is our obligation on the landfill closure? Because I know we changed it over from an enterprise fund, brought it into the general fund. So what does this 3.3 million represent? What's our liability there?
Well, I think it's we have to determine when the actual life of the landfill. So I think the landfill, it's about 50 years. So that's kind of the present value of the present value of the 5 years. So basically we have, we're going to have to spend in today's dollars about $3.3 million to close that landfill. So, and I know there's various things. I don't know exactly what it takes to close the landfill, but I know they have to cover it and bury it and do all kinds of things to make it, make it EPA, equivalent. So, and I know that number, that number is kind of a moving target as well. And because I know, they're talking about expanding the landfill and increasing the life. So, if they can do that, I mean, they might push that number from 50 years to 100 years or, longer. So, I mean, I know that's a moving target, that number. Go ahead, Sherry. Yeah.
I've been doing this landfill post-closure analysis for 4 years since I started, and it's always been 50 years. It just keeps moving. It hasn't reduced at all. So whatever they're doing, they're maintaining the life of it, so.
Okay, so the next one is, in light of the city's investment in capital assets and the bond activity, what are the bond covenant ratio requirements? So again, the only ratio requirements that we have, the debt limit is established by statute at 15% of assessed value. So, basically, we were kind of bumping up against that 15% debt level last year and this year, but as the assessed value is increasing, the amount of our actual debt limit is increasing as well. So we should be fine going forward as long as the assessed value continues to increase. And I spoke with the assessor today, and for the near future, he said assessed value is going to go up. So we're not going to see a decline in assessed value. He doesn't think anytime soon. So that's good news. And the debt, we don't anticipate issuing much more debt. I know we're doing some sewer issues here coming up. And after that, I think the 1 cent sales tax, we're going to issue some debt in 2017, 2018, that time frame. Probably 4 or 5 million, depending on what the board decides tomorrow. But I don't know that there's too much plans to issue much more debt.
Okay, well, this question is more for Mr. Carter.
Okay.
And does this
Standards.
fall as to one of the areas you check annually during your audit?
Yeah, I mean, we certainly review the calculation. The table that's provided is actually in the statistical section of the CAFR, which is unaudited. But we do some work on that section just to make sure that it all ties out and makes sense.
Pretty much, we're not spending above the cap.
Right.
Yeah, absolutely.
And again, the next question talks about investment policy. I believe that the city's investments are within the policy and NRS as disclosed in the notes. The investment policy is fairly restrictive. I mean, just the statutes are fairly restrictive. There's not really much they can actually do. So it's pretty much limited to 10-year fixed income securities at that, On number 7, pledged revenues, again.
If I could,
Sure.
I had a question on 6. Because the funds are all managed and invested based on the policies that are handled in the treasurer's office.
That's correct.
And does the financial statement audit the treasurer's office?
Absolutely.
Yeah, and we specifically test those investments back to the investment policy. And we've actually had questions where we've had gone to the treasurer's office where they're invested in items that it appears the maturity is beyond the investment policy. And so we had to drill down and find out that the city was invested in a specific tranche of that debt that matured within the policy. So we look at that stuff pretty close.
Good, that's the answer I wanted.
On number 7, talking about pledged revenues, are there any additional future revenues? Typically, on our consolidated tax debt, we pledge 15% of C-tax. So we're pretty much at that level now. We were actually above that level back in 2008, 2009. I mean, when we issued the debt, we were within the limit, but then the C-tax started going down. Our sales tax numbers started going down, so we were actually not at 1 times coverage. But I mean, we were still making the debt payments. There really wasn't anything we could do about it. But now with the taxes starting to come back up, and plus we're going to be doing some refundings, which is going to lower the interest rates. So we should be at that coverage level. Water, sewer, stormwater bonds are typically used to repay their respective issues, and then motor vehicle fuel taxes. We use those. Those are the pledged revenues we use for those specific issues. So
The question was, are there any future revenues to be pledged?
at this point, there isn't. There's typically going to be water, sewer, stormwater, depending on the needs. But we're not anticipating issuing any general fund bonds, general fund bonds that are just using C-tax revenues or property tax revenues. We're not anticipating issuing any of those. We do have the 1 cent taxes that are pledged for those specific purposes for the infrastructure tax. So, we've issued those bonds, and we're anticipating issuing, like I said, in 2017, 2018 time period of probably $4 or $5 million more with the pledge of that 1 cent.
And the sales taxes would presumably be higher at that point also?
Correct. From what we're seeing now, the sales taxes are actually higher than what we projected even, a year ago, 2 years ago when we issued the debt.
Good, thank you.
Mhm. And then number 8 talks about OPEB and unfunded pension. So we've talked a little bit about the unfunded pension. OPEB is the other post-employment benefits, which is basically the medical insurance for retirees. And we're actually going to be talking about establishing an OPEB trust fund that's going to the Board of Supervisors tomorrow. So we're hoping to get that done, have it on the books, July 1st. It might not be on July 1st, but it's going to be close, because we have to do some things with the RBIF to make sure our investments can go over there and they can handle some of our investments. We're anticipating funding it with, it says $300,000 here. We're hoping to probably put over there about $500,000. We've got some money that we've been saving in the group medical fund. So what we want to do is transfer that money to the OPEB trust, and then we want to go ahead and add an additional $200,000 or $300,000 every year into that trust to reduce the OPEB liability. So it's going to come off the books, go into that trust, and then we'll reduce the liability every year, hopefully by a couple $300,000 every year, depending on the economy and those types of things.
So, how did you come up with that number? Is there a target as to when you expect this to be 100% funded that you're shooting for?
I don't think
or is it just
we'll ever be 100% funded.
I probably,
right. I mean, we're
yeah.
just doing the best we can with what we have.
Right.
So so typically, when the employee groups, when we negotiated with the employee groups, they gave up a cost of living to get this benefit, and typically it was about 1% of their salaries. So that's kind of the number that we're using. That's the $300,000 number that we're using, is about 1% of salaries that we want to go ahead and move over into that OPEB trust. So that's kind of how we came up with the $300,000 number. And I mean, it'd be great to fund more, because the liability, we're actually doing an actuarial study this year, and we'll have a better number on what the actual liability is. But it's going to be probably going to be 14, 15 million, I would think. Wouldn't you think, Sherry? I mean, I suspect that'll be the current, or the liability. So I mean, it's going to, if we can get to 5 million, I think that'd be great. Fund pay as you go and have the $5 million liability, $5 million reduction of the liability. I mean, I think that would be a good thing. So
Because my question, my curiosity is, over time, are we going to be just sort of treading water, or are we going to be kind of catching up and really bringing that down over time, or is that going to be again a moving target where it goes from 15 million to 20 million in a few years?
Well, it depends. I mean, it all depends on the employees and how they we're making, it's a really good benefit, but it's harder to get because we're making employees stay longer. So you basically have to have 20 years of service with the city to get the benefit. So, it just all depends on the workforce, and, I mean, the current generation, it doesn't seem like stays in a job as long. They tend to move around more. So that could reduce liability. There's just a lot of factors. And again, we'll have, I guess probably every other year we're required to have an actuarial study. So it's going to be a moving target.
So another concern on the flip side is if there ever came a point where that trust fund was overfunded, the city can't get that money back. Is that correct?
Well, they can use it as long as they're using it to pay medical insurance. They can use it for that. So basically, the city wouldn't have to fund that year, because we're using. I mean, we're putting the current year funds into that trust, and that's about $1 million a year. So if we ever got too much money, then we just wouldn't fund, and we just start bringing that money down. So that would be a good problem to have.
Just for, if I could, just for my own edification, what is the post-employment health benefit city employees get?
Well, basically, for unclassified employees, if you have 15 years of service, the city will pay 75% of the employee and 50% of the spouse up until they reach Medicare age. And then I believe it goes down to 50%. And our actual insurance amount goes down as well because Medicare becomes the primary and ours is the secondary. If you have 20 years of service, the benefit is 90% and 50%. And I believe for all the other bargaining units, they don't have the 75, 50%. They have to be here for 20 years. And it's 90% for the employee and 50% for the spouse.
And, you know, so I'm assuming from what you're saying that the city employees stay on the same insurance plan as regular employees, is that correct?
Correct.
Even after they're on Medicare?
Correct. It's
And
similar. Right.
I know the state made some major changes in their post-employment
Correct.
policies for employees. Would the city ever do
Well,
something similar where once you're on Medicare, you can go out and buy your own supplement?
Well, I
instead
mean,
of-
we talked about that, but again, the state doesn't have to bargain with their employees. They can basically tell them what they want to do, or they make the local governments bargain with the employees. So it's all collective bargaining. So, I mean, we've actually talked about that, about giving them the money and saying, okay, here, you can take this and then, go buy a policy on an exchange or something like that. So I think it's still something that we might consider, doing, but again, it has to be bargained.
Okay, so the only reason that the plan is the way it is because of a collective bargaining agreement, and that could be changed with a new collective bargaining agreement?
Right, it would have to be changed with that, correct. And again, like I said earlier, the employees gave up typically a 1% of their salary for that, to help pay for that. And that's kind of what we want to use to put in that trust every year, is that 1%. It's about $300,000 a year, so.
Okay, I was curious, this is for Dan and Mark. Based on your experience, what are other municipalities doing to address the OPEB liability?
Yeah, we certainly have a handful of other clients that have set up trusts, OPEB trusts, to deal with that. I was going to point out, I think it's to page 44. Does everybody have a copy?
I have mine.
Sorry. I was just going to point out the table, page 49, that first column, the actuarial value of assets, that's zero right now because there is nothing set aside. So what we're talking about is all the funds that go into that OPEB trust, we'd start adding whatever the balance is into that column, and then you'd see this unfunded liability come down and the funded ratio go up. And really the only way to do that is to set up a trust so that it gets out away from the cities, not that they can just pull it back in and use it for general fund purposes. So, but it's like Nick said, it depends on the finances of the particular governments. Some governments have had the ability to set aside quite a bit of money, even pre-funding when these GASBs first came out. There's a lot of governments who haven't been able to do that. So I don't know if I could give you a ratio. It's probably less than 50-50, the people that have OPEB trusts. So.
Did Moss Adams have anything to add on that?
The only thing I would add is those who are dealing with bankruptcy and dealt with this issue differently than others.
Okay, so on the whole, how would you rate Carson City in this respect?
That's a good question. I don't think you're in an unusual situation at all. I think the fact that you're talking about setting up a trust and have a plan to fund it is a great step.
Okay, good. That makes sense to me too, and we'll be pulling for your efforts tomorrow.
Well, we had already brought this to the board in March and kind of gave them the pros and cons, and they basically told us to go ahead and get it started. So hopefully it'll be just a formality tomorrow, because we've already kind of talked about the pros and cons of the OPEB trust. So now we're actually going to have them actually fund the trust document and the trustees and those types of things. So hopefully it'll go well. So, okay. And then in question 9, you know, again, we had talked, you know, at the March 9th meeting about the audit findings from the CAFR. And, you know, no significant deficiencies. There were some internal control issues. And then we've, you know, I think we talked at length about that, you know, on March 9th. So if there are any other questions, I think that's about all that I have on that one.
Okay, I don't know which page in the package. It's under the Carson City, Nevada Deer Grantor Agency, and it was a letter November 24th. Had to do with documentation of time and effort of employees.
Right, yeah, we had talked about that. I'm not sure you were at that meeting.
No,
When we discussed this, but yeah, we had Patrick Pittenger and Nikki Yeager come and talk, and I believe that everybody's in compliance now with these statutes, and they have policies and procedures in place to hopefully make sure that these won't happen again.
The one question I had here, and you were right, I wasn't at that meeting, what kind of money is involved? I mean, apparently there were some question costs, and the letter did not reflect to what kind of money was questioned.
Yeah, I'm not sure they care so much about the money as it is more about the process, because there probably
sure.
wasn't much money involved, I
Yeah,
don't
the
think.
question costs tend to be the hammer
Right,
to get you to comply.
but I just don't know at this point. I couldn't answer. I'm sorry. I don't know, I mean, I'm sure you probably don't remember. It was probably more of, you know, they weren't preparing their timesheets correctly, I believe. And
Right.
I don't even know if there
Weren't
was.
allocating their
Correct.
time properly to the right.
Right, they weren't being able to document it.
Normally, when you have a situation like that, you do question those costs that did not appear to be adequately
Yeah,
documented.
I don't think we determined any question costs related to those findings. It's really just is the time charging being supported like it's supposed to? It's not, you can't really say it's yes or no that there were question costs related to that. I mean, those people will get paid. It's just, it was more of a documentation thing. So we definitely didn't include any question costs in our
Okay,
findings.
so you didn't actually get a letter from the grantor agency on this? Oh, okay. Then they considered it relatively minor. Okay, thank you.
Any other questions before we move on? Okay, next, agenda item number 7, and it's regarding the audit committee's interaction with the external auditor as they prepare for the fiscal year 2015 audit of the city's financial statements. Just a background on this, I think we as the audit committee had a chance to look at the statements way after they were approved and accepted and went to the board. And I just, as part of our responsibilities, is to, I think, have a peek and take a look at it and maybe offer any, or ask any questions and comments in advance if we can do that. So was there anybody that wanted to bring, I think Bill had a few comments on this. Go ahead, Bill.
Thank you. This is one of the categories where I have been going through the municipal code and identifying responsibilities that the audit committee has. And I've got a short document here that I'd like to read into the record. It said, over the past several years, the audit committee has been working to develop a process to meet the requirements placed on the committee by the Carson City Municipal Code to provide the Board of Supervisors necessary and usable information about the city's financial operations and reporting. One important component is the committee's responsibility for overseeing Carson City's annual financial audit, the CAFR, which is a comprehensive annual financial report. The CAFR external audit is performed by a certified professional accounting firm. For fiscal years 2014, 15, and 16, the audit firm of ID Bailey, the CPAs, will perform the audit. The audit committee's requirements vis-a-vis the annual financial audit are stated in Chapter 2.14 of the Municipal Code and include: 1, the Carson City Audit Committee plays a key role with respect to the integrity of the city's financial information, its systems of internal controls, the legal and ethical conduct of employees. Then I go on. The committee will review and make recommendations to the Board of Supervisors regarding the annual financial audit. The committee will annually review the audit scope and work plan of the city auditor in conjunction with the external auditor's plan to address the coordination of audit efforts to ensure completeness of coverage and reduction of redundant efforts, effective use of audit resources. This is taking a little longer than I'd hoped. The review makes, the committee is to also review and make recommendations to the Board of Supervisors regarding audit findings, including the status and implementation of recommendations for both internal and external audits. This is also Chapter 2.14.040 says, the City Audit Committee will review and make recommendations to the Board of Supervisors pertaining to the external auditor's annual audit plan and inquire into external audit matters as deemed appropriate. B is to oversee the appointment of the internal auditor, independent auditors to be engaged by the Board of Supervisors for external reporting and establish related audit fees. Review and evaluate the performance of the independent auditors and establish a regular schedule for periodically rebidding the annual audit. And finally, review and make recommendations to the Board of Supervisors regarding all significant written communications between the independent auditors and management, such as any management letter or schedule of unadjusted differences. The Carson City Audit Committee needs to address the above requirements, and to do so it must increase and more clearly identify what actions and processes the committee should undertake. Based on discussions with the city's internal auditor, Moss Adams, the Carson City Department of Finance, and the committee's chair, I propose for the committee's discussion the following process. That is, 1, periodically, currently once every 3 years, the Audit Committee Chair appoint one committee member to participate in the review process to select an external qualified CPA firm to recommend to the Board of Supervisors to perform the annual CAFR audit. Subsequent to the selection of the proposed auditor, the designated committee of the will report to the board, to the committee. Annually, the committee chair appoints 1 or 2 committee members to participate in the following actions with the external auditor and city finance department during the planning, performance, and reporting of the external auditor's work. During January of each year, meet and discuss with the external auditor and the city finance department the planning process and planned work for the upcoming annual audit. 2, in early October each year, meet and review progress during the audit testing phase. 3, in early November, discuss the preliminary draft audit report and potential findings and other issues identified during the audit. Then at the December or January audit committee meeting, the committee members report to the audit committee the results of the meetings and work performed relating to the audit. At the February or March committee meeting, subsequent to the Board of Supervisors' action on the draft CAFR report, audit committee members who have individually reviewed the CAFR approved by the Board of Supervisors analyze the financial statements, related attachments, and reported findings, and discuss with the Department of Finance, internal auditors, and external auditors any issues deemed appropriate to clarify the significance of the information provided in the CAFR. As an aside, this is what we just did in the prior agenda item. Then finally, at the April-May committee meeting, the questions will be addressed, and then a decision will be made as to what information is appropriate to present to the Board of Supervisors. This is a more formal and structured type of process than we'd tried in the past couple of years. And, I propose this or something similar to establish as our committee's normal annual working procedures. That ends my statement. Are there any questions?
I think I can just make a general comment. I think in the internal audit world, the external audit world, the audit committee world, that structure is what each of us strives for. I mean, I think that's what we're used to as accountant types. And so I like the idea of, it appeared that you had like an agenda for what we would cover at meetings. I think that would help staff also know what to have prepared and ready for meetings. So I like that you're trying to structure activities that this audit committee would be responsible for while meeting what our actual code says the committee's supposed to do. So I'm not necessarily sure of each of the components, as I haven't had an opportunity to read each idea, but I do like structure. I do like giving staff expectations for what we want at each quarterly meeting, and that we work as a team with the internal auditors and the external auditors to ensure we don't overlap, but that we come together for the betterment of the taxpayers and for the running of the city. So I think you're on a path that I like, but I reserve a little bit of judgment to be able to read the specific tasks.
My goal here is to get some response, and my document is just that, as if you might consider it a draft rather than a proposal. I would hope that by our next audit committee meeting, the members of the committee can look at that and hopefully proceed down this avenue. So we have a structure to interact with the external auditors.
Don Leonard, just a quick comment. I appreciate getting this since I'm the new person on this street. This will be very helpful to me. Thank you.
Yeah.
You're welcome.
I would like to take a look at it too, and I think we could probably discuss this more in the future. I kind of want to be careful that I think also to a focus, I believe, of this committee is really internal audit and not external audit so much. So I want to be careful that the time we have and our efforts are more focused on our internal auditor and reporting that to the board. I think it's a great idea. We are supposed to have some input on the external auditor. I want to be careful though that we don't take too much, and I'll have to read that over and probably in a future meeting we can discuss that and decide exactly what those procedures would be. But my only concern in going down this path is there being too much focus for this committee on the external auditor, where we really need to focus on our internal, and that's my only comment. So if there are no other comments, I think we'll just look at this possibly for a future agenda item, and when we've all had a chance to read what the vice chairman has put together, come back with some comments and maybe some kind of a plan.
Okay, I'll also acknowledge that I just handed these documents out, and they're in an attempt to comply with the open meeting law, and that this process is still ongoing. I don't know, do our internal auditor or external auditor have any comments or opinions on this?
I would make just a few quick comments. I think we're actually doing most of this stuff already. I think obviously the audit committee is involved in the RFP process for the audit. That's always been the case. So I think we've, under this kind of second page that starts with periodically, I think we're definitely doing the periodic once every 3-year step. I think that as far as the annual procedures go, we historically have provided a letter to the audit committee with our plan, scope, and timing of the audit, and in there we say, definitely don't hesitate. We want to have open communication. Reach out to us if you have any questions or concerns. You know, I've presented that communication verbally from time to time, and typically a letter is requested at the end of that. So that my plan was to continue to do that on a go-forward basis, provide that letter to each of you. And then on 2 and 3, I guess my only question would be timing. And obviously this is, still in draft form. We actually don't start the audit, I think, until October 3rd is our planned start date this year. So timing would be a little bit flexible on number 2. And then number 3 is where we've always run into issues. And maybe Member Bagwell can speak to this. Because of the CAFR not being able to be public before the board approves it, that's kind of the issue where we run into. And it's just a timing thing, I think, and maybe the district attorney's office can correct me if I'm wrong. I think once the members of the board receive that CAFR, it's public, correct?
That's correct, unless there's confidential information in that.
And that occurs well in advance of the meeting. They've got several weeks and so there are clients where we've tried to time this in that time the audit committee meeting in the time when everyone's received the CAFR, so it's technically public. We can go ahead and have our meeting. It's a busy time of the year for everybody, and we've struggled with that in the past.
And I think one of the things too is by the time you have information for us, we might be timing our meetings where we just miss.
Yes,
If I can make a suggestion, maybe it'd be helpful if perhaps maybe the vice chairman spoke with Mr. Carter, at a later point and kind of went over and maybe between the two of you, because it sounds like a lot of these things are being incorporated, and find out what actually is not an overlap and that we do need to add before we discuss this further. Would that be a workable solution?
Sure, I'd be happy to work with the ID Bailey. My thought here was, rather than an exchange of letters, though, that there would be actually physical interaction and connection. Letters don't always disclose everything that might be of interest to the audit committee.
Oh, yeah, I definitely don't disagree. There's a lot of information we're required to communicate to you under our auditing standards.
Right.
So it can be cumbersome to do all that verbally. I mean, we could certainly do both. I'm definitely
Okay,
to do that.
would be
Absolutely.
more my preference.
Yeah.
Well, then before we bring this up again, then possibly if the vice chairman and Mr. Carter could get together and then come back with a plan that you both, so that there's no overlap and everything is being covered, and then and that's something that seems workable between the two of you, and then we can then discuss that then.
Yeah.
Mr. Chair, Mark Staranka from Los Adams. Just a suggestion, not necessarily a suggestion of what to do, but a way to think about it. In many municipalities, there's a draft CAFR, there's a final CAFR. And different municipalities deal with a draft in different ways, relative to briefings to board members, relative to audit committees. And so I would just maybe suggest that thinking about the draft and the process by which there's communication relative to that might be something to explore without, suggesting what you should be doing. But that's a point in the process that gives, I think, some flexibility.
One of the reasons that we came up with this, or I came up with this, and is the fact in prior years the audit committee has approved, if you will, the draft CAFR to submit to the Board of Supervisors without actually having an opportunity to go through it in detail. And that I understand the legal and ramifications of this, and this is one of the reasons I was trying to set up a process during the cycle so that the audit committee member or members, whoever having that interchange, could then report to the committee in time to potentially have some input to the Board of Supervisors prior to their having to accept or reject the report. Hence, I don't see that we're going to have a situation where we're going to get to look at as a committee, as to look at the draft report before it goes to the supervisors. So this is kind of an attempt to do an alternate approach and still provide the committee to provide some input.
Can I ask something different, Bill? Is your objective to have different components in the CAFR, different areas addressed in the CAFR? So the question being, could you not have taken the 2014 CAFR and made recommendations for future or changes or issues that you want to see in the 2015 CAFR? I mean, sometimes when I read them, I look at it more that way, that I say, oh, wow, this should have been more fully disclosed, or I'd like a better note or a more understanding of this liability. Isn't that as helpful to give the external auditor or finance staff, what do I want to see in the CAFR that I didn't see this year? So I'm not so sure.
That's kind of what
I think we have an
saying
opportunity
here
to
is-
do it, though, not with the current CAFR. We can take the 2014
Right.
one and digest it and send them some recommendations before he's out there preparing the 2015. I think that would actually be more helpful than when they're in the crunch trying to meet a time deadline and somebody throws in, oh, I want an extended note in the CAFR on, I don't know, I don't like the post-closure on the landfill. I think the public needs more disclosure there. And you're like, oh, we got one day to get it done. So,
Well, I don't anticipate the audit committee member to actually be making recommendations to the external auditor. I don't think they would appreciate it, and it wouldn't necessarily, to me, make sense, given our recommendation responsibilities. But that's what I had here in the sense is that we would be looking at and analyzing, like this 2014 CAFR, now subsequent to its acceptance by the Board of Supervisors. And hence, our questions here relating to that occur after the fact of the receipt and would only really be applicable moving forward unless there was something to report directly to the Board of Supervisors. That's what I'm trying to do anyway.
I guess what I'm trying to determine is, do you actually picture that we would make a recommendation as the audit committee not to accept a CAFR? I don't see that reality, so I guess I'm just being honest with you here that for me, it's what do I want to see in the future CAFRs that I thought needed improvement. I can't see you as this group telling the external auditor that we're not going to recommend acceptance of the CAFR.
Oh, I agree.
Oh.
That wouldn't happen, but at least I certainly don't see it happening. But, yeah, as a purpose going forward, but also as an informational process to the Board of Supervisors, if during our review we identify issues, maybe like the OPEB, that come up and can actually have a real impact on our financial status, that it would be incumbent on the audit committee to transfer that report that information to the Board of Supervisors. I wouldn't anticipate that there would be a formal report to the Board of Supervisors, except rarely.
Okay. Yeah, as a audit committee, I don't think we want to take on the responsibility of being, commenting on the external auditor's report like that. But I think some of these issues that we do see and some of the things that have been talked about today have been, they're ongoing issues, the OPEB, the different funding things. So it's not like in 1 year we're going to have such a major issue that we have to deal with it. I think it's helpful. So even if we see it, we're looking at it, retrospectively, afterwards, it's very helpful. And I kind of think that is probably, I'm assuming, kind of what you're wanting us to do. That if we are, I think part of the frustration was last year that we didn't feel like we had a chance to look at it. But in thinking about it, that's probably not as critical. And as long as we do get the chance to take a look at it and a process is put together where we're reviewing that would be great. So I look forward to then hearing what you and Mr. Carter come up with, some specific things, and in our future meetings then. Okay, with that, I'd like to move on to agenda. Right, I'll look at that too. I'll get that thing. All right, going on to agenda number 8. We're now going to go through the audit findings and response tracking report. And from Moss Adams, I'd like to go ahead and report on, I think everybody should have an Excel spreadsheet here of the tracking and where we stand on these different projects.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Again, Mark Starenka, Moss Adams. So you have in your packet, I'm holding up the cover page, so a summary sheet plus a number of sheets behind it that represent tabs in an Excel spreadsheet, one tab for each of the studies that are covered on the summary page. So what has been updated here since the last time this information has been reviewed with you include the adding of the internal controls review and associated findings into the supporting pages. The city's added responses to the fleet utilization study, which city management, the fleet manager had shared with you in one of the previous meetings, and so that information now has been populated in terms of their responses. And one of the things that we need to add, that apologize that we forgot to do, which is add the findings from the CAFR. So we had talked last meeting about doing that, and your esteemed vice chair shared that we forgot. So thank you. What else? And then what, in essence, has come off the details or has been archived is the golf course study, which in essence has run its course, no pun intended. And that's what you have before you. So that's your update. It's just our mechanism to track. We will, Nick and I are continuing to work together to be, I would say, more proactive in giving the city time to populate responses, and as those continue to be responded to in terms of, if there's something else done relative to, for example, the employee efficiency study, to get that information in and reflected here. But again, this is just our way to have a historical tracking of what's been done, what's happening.
So maybe I can jump in a little bit here. When I am looking at this tracking spreadsheet, for instance, if I were to go to the fleet management efficiency study, there's 24 findings and you indicate 4 are complete. It was my understanding that what we did as a board and everything is we've actually closed that one with the final, and that we have one only outstanding item that's partially implemented that we had left open to be completed. So this is kind of maybe both a staff discussion and one with Moss Adams, but what I'm looking to see in the future and the goal here is we've got the first one, even the community facility cost recovery, has been sitting out since 2013. So with no plan to implement. So I'd like to see that the city staff work together to indicate, one, we don't think we're going to implement any of them and we should close it. I just don't understand why we're leaving these open if we have no intention of implementing them, because they were a good idea, but subsequent acts have occurred to change our mind, which can happen. But let's move through these and not leave them open. And again, the fleet management is done except for one. Is that correct? Because all of them show yes or no, and the board accepted the no's, that we weren't going to implement those. And we left one, which is number 11, is the partial. So should that not be the only one left on the tracking spreadsheet, is that you're ensuring that they complete the plan as indicated? I'm trying to understand the process. Sorry, I'm the new one to the, Don and I here are new to this, but the report isn't effective for me if it's just sitting out here for years and we don't have staff report on it, we don't have you report on it, just sits on a spreadsheet.
Yeah, it's good points. So I would say a couple of different answers. So one answer is I concur with the fleet management study. As far as the community facility study, I believe the hang up there, for lack of a better word, has been I believe management feels like they need direction, and I shouldn't be speaking for them, but I'll give it a shot, that they need direction from the board on a number of findings or recommendations associated with that report, and until they either officially ask for or the board officially gives to, that stuff is going to hang in sort of no man's land. But that's not really my place, but I'm trying to give you an explanation.
You know, I know we've had this discussion before. Supervisor Bagwell does bring up a good point that sometimes we have these things here and they don't get taken care of. And I know we've spoken to this before the Board of Supervisors, where the city manager was waiting for direction from the board and the board was waiting for direction. I'm kind of wondering if maybe a good process here would be typically what you'd have in an audit. You'd go to management, the board, you'd have your recommendations, you'd have your findings. Management would then come back with a response, and then we take that to the board. So I'm thinking that in the case of, for example, the community facility cost recovery, if there's some issues, if possibly staff could come up with some suggested ideas of how they want to implement, or if they don't want to implement certain things, so that then that can go before the board and we get it resolved, whether we move forward with it or not. So I think what Supervisor Bagwell is saying is we just want to get some resolution here to some of these things, and I'm wondering if that would be a better process. I know this keeps coming up and up, so possibly if is it a workable thing for staff to just, rather than wait for the board, come up with what you think might work, and then we just go to the board and discuss it.
So what I'll go ahead and do is I'll go ahead and forward this to the city manager, and you know, he can, I mean, it looks like it's all parks and recreation issues. So, I mean, I'll be more than happy to do that, and then, because I believe when we took this to the board, they didn't really they didn't really tell us to do anything with it. They just kind of accepted it. They didn't say, do this or implement it. That's my recollection, because this is probably fairly stale, right? It's 2-3 years old.
Yes, and I concur with that recollection.
Yeah.
And this is not the first time this comes up. I'm kind of glad we're having this discussion rather than in front of the board again, because we've already done that with the board. And so I guess what my recommendation, I guess as the audit committee, what we'd like to do is just see that when these recommendations come out, if it's the city manager that's going to have to answer it, we get his response, and we go to the board with that. And then the board has an opportunity to say yes or no, because I think they're kind of looking for some feedback, you know, and then that's typically, I think in an audit process, we come up with the findings and they come up with their plan of implementation. Or if they feel like it's not feasible, that's fine too. But we're basically saying we'd like to see that plan and bring it before the board.
And that's fine. I believe a lot of these are fairly political issues that, you know, the board really have to deal with or not, you know, dealing with school districts and, you know, facilities recoveries and those types of things. So, I mean, those are political issues. So it's going to have to be something that they would have to tell us either we want to do it or we don't.
But staff could make the recommendation is what they think, and then let them say no or yes. But I think if we give them something to discuss, otherwise if we just leave it there, what's happening is nothing is being resolved. So I would suggest that staff comes up with what they think is the best approach, and then leave it with the board to discuss it at that point. But I think to not have any plan and let it go and just wait for the board to act on it has not been effective.
In essence, I agree, and the whole concept of internal audit and audit reports doesn't work unless you have an implementation process set up by management, and then that process then be carried forward by the city in this case. If, as it becomes a political issue, then that's obviously a decision of the Board of Supervisors. And that's, you know, I guess where our audit committee is looking for guidance there as to what to pursue and what to, in essence, let go. But we do need an implementation plan for it to work.
So I guess where we can kind of wrap this up, if we could, I guess by the next time we have a report, I would ask that if Moss Adams, if they could get together with staff and make sure there's implementation for everything, we have something in writing that can then go to the board. And if there's some items that are just to be closed off, take care of it and get it closed, so that at our next meeting we'll have, there's implementation or recommendations that staff feels that we can take to the board, they can make decisions, and then we can go, then we will start to track what the board has agreed. Now, if the board has said this is closed in effect, then we will take it off the list. So, but we will only track things that are truly open, where the board has now said we want to move ahead on it, and then we need, as an audit committee, kind of follow up and make sure that's happening. I guess if the board doesn't care about some item, I don't want us to be looking at it every time we get together and wondering. And so hopefully we'll just kind of move things forward. So is there any issues with that?
No issues. I mean, we're of course happy to be part of that process, but I would just say it's not our role to make sure that happens.
I'll be
right?
happy to take the role. I certainly sit in a particular position. I am more than happy to tee this up as an agenda item for the Board of Supervisors to either implement and direct staff to do a plan, or to disregard the recommendations and close the audit. I mean, I think that's what I'm trying to get to, is I look at these as opportunities for the Board of Supervisors to look at efficiency and effectiveness. And yes, ultimately we have to decide that, but then that directs staff where to go. And so I guess for me, even if it's political, I guess I get paid not a lot to do that, but that's what I'm here for, and just have to do it. And so I'd be happy to make a motion to bring this back to the Board of Supervisors to give direction to staff on the outstanding reports that we have.
Are they?
I did.
I'll second it. Excuse me.
All those in
I'll second.
favor of that motion?
Aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Any further discussion?
The only further discussion is, Mark, if you'll meet with me, and Nick, I'd like to line up which ones are outstanding, because I'd like to take it all in one shot. I don't want to dribble it into the Board of Supervisors and drag it out 4 more meetings. I'd like to tee it up as a package. So, thank you.
Are there any other comments on the progress, the update on the progress of the efficiency, the different projects we've got here? Any more comments? Done with that? Okay.
Don Leonard, I'm a little slow. I was looking at the internal, well, I looked at all this a lot because this is new, but the internal control review, there is an awful lot of that's beyond internal audit, that's same sort of stuff. Management, an awful lot of stuff needs management action, and that ought to be a part of what you're up to.
Yeah, and I would just say, in that one, in fairness to city management and timing, so last audit committee meeting, we presented that report. We're actually presenting that report to the board tomorrow, and so then that will initiate this process. And I would say that I think we have made progress in this process because, for example, the employee efficiency study, city manager Nick Morano presented an implementation plan item by item of that, which is reflected in here. And so although it's taken a considerable amount of time, we're getting there. And in essence, what we're kind of talking about is sort of going back, in essence, to the first couple of studies where we didn't really have the collective wheels turning together to sort of regroup and either punt on them or decide that we need to revisit them. But I suspect that with the internal controls review, we'll see the same type of follow-through from management as we have in the most recent few.
There's going to be some real follow-up needed on a lot of this management stuff, because it's either going to be the city manager or the board of supervisors who are going to have to take that stuff on.
All right, any more comments before we move on to the next agenda item? Okay. All right. Agenda item number 9, to identify, discuss, and provide recommendations to the Board of Supervisors on additional projects to be performed by the internal auditor. I think this is where Moss Adams is we're going to be taking a look at the next year and make some recommendations as to what projects we want to take on. And I know Moss Adams has prepared a budget and some potential projects for us to discuss. So at this time, Mark, would you like to go ahead and discuss that? And bring this-
Mark, if I can?
Yeah, absolutely.
Just for a second, if the audit committee agrees to these projects, could you also include in the recommendation, we're planning on bringing back the audit, the internal auditor contract to the board at the June 18th meeting. So maybe you can recommend that we extend the contract another year as well. Because typically I like to tell the board that the audit committee, requests that we extend the contract, and then you actually have these projects in the plan. If you could do both of those in this action, I think that's fair, don't you think? I mean, they can't really do the work unless they have a contract, right? And they're proposing that they
I
do the
see that as
work.
two different things, Nick. I see one is, what do we want audited? And two, who do we want to do it? I don't think that's actually the same thing at all.
To be performed by the internal auditor for the period ending in June. You can provide recommendations, but it is on additional projects.
I mean, don't, you can't.
I guess we
you
could
can't
technically say the summary said Moss Adams.
Right.
So I guess maybe we could,
Well, it's, you can assume that the internal auditor is Moss Adams, and that's what we're talking about. It's broad enough to be talking about whomever the internal auditor is. You could
I think
recommend.
what Nick's asking though is that we
But
include a contract
No,
saying with Moss Adams.
No,
Oh, I
I'm
misunderstood.
just asking that you include a recommendation to extend the contract for another year. That would be your recommendation to the board.
Well, can't we
I mean, if you didn't want to
do that
that's fine.
separately?
Well, it's not agendized.
We don't have an agenda.
So
Oh.
that's fine. I mean,
No.
if you didn't want to do that, I mean, we can still take the contract to the board and just leave out the fact, any reference to the audit committee. I mean, that's fine too. So, I mean, it doesn't matter to me.
So if I could just interject here for a second. So the action that you'll be taking is just to make a recommendation to the board. This is with regard to the projects. So if, there could be discussion on the record with regard to the extension. I mean, in order for these projects to take place, you need to have an auditor in place. And so it doesn't have to be part of the actual motion. If it's in the discussion, I think they'll read that, especially if they're looking at the minutes.
So we don't need to take any action on that now, then, I guess
We're just gonna do this.
we're just going to do this, okay, all right. Go ahead, so Mark, could you kind of go over your recommendations?
Sure. And I would say, and I agree that those are actually two different decisions, right? There's nothing that says it has to be us, right? So in your packet, you have, about an 8-slide presentation, and I'm really going to focus us on slide 5, which is the program, and we've presented it as we have before with a series of projects, so a brief description of the projects, budget, and a general timing of them on the final slide. I was just going to point out prior to talking about it, on slide number 4 or page 4, depending on what your packet looks like, there's just a list of the projects, some of which are in the audit tracking that we were just talking about in the last agenda item. The only point I was going to make here is, we've talked about this before, we kind of started with a performance focus, and in the past year we've suggested and we've moved towards more of an internal controls focus, because a holistic program should have that, and so we've kind of made that migration, and this year's recommended program will be reflective of that. So on page number 5 or slide number 5 entitled FY 15-16 Internal Audit Plan, these are our suggestions or recommendations for your consideration. So there are really 5 projects, and I'll just talk briefly about each of them. So the first one is well, let me first say the first 3 are directly as a result from the internal controls review. The first one being a cash and revenue collection, we're calling improvement, and we chose that word carefully versus calling it an audit, because one of the things we want to do here, we easily could have said, let's just do a deeper audit there. But one of the things we talked about with city management, city manager's office about is we don't want to just deliver more findings and recommendations. We want to help the city move forward relative to this. So while we would do some sampling and testing here, it's as much about helping the city formalize where need to, update where need to, policies and procedures, provide training where necessary. So this is not just looking deeper, but taking it forward so the city's in a position to be stronger relative to this, rather than just receiving more findings or recommendations. And so taking it as far forward as possible, in essence, into implementation. Conversely, the next 2 projects, payroll testing and P-card testing, are in fact that. Specifically to do some limited scope sampling and testing in each of those areas, because that has not been done as part of the internal controls review, and just see what we find. We may find it's just great, everything's just fine there, or we may find some things that will inform how the city can strengthen those particular activities moving forward. The 4th project, which is kind of generically entitled Policies and Procedures Updates, is Carson City, like most of our other municipal clients or governmental clients, is behind's not the right word, but would benefit from some updating, refreshing, filling out of policies and procedures. Clearly that came out of the internal controls review, kind of no surprise. Also came out of the employee efficiency study, the risk assessment. Part of that's just, in a way, human nature. We've, had a tough economic round here, and we've had cutbacks. Policies and procedures is not at the top of anyone's list when you're trying to deal with the day-to-day, so that stuff tends to take a back seat. The 2 concerns there is, of course, you always want to have policies and procedures that are updated and fresh, and there's nothing sexy and fun about doing that. But all of our clients, as is Carson City, is going to be facing succession challenges with the baby boomers, which makes knowledge loss all that much more predominant. So knowledge transfer and the ability to be able to know how to do specific roles, especially very important ones, fiscally related, as we lose institutional knowledge, makes those policies and procedures that much more important. So the intent here was to first help the city set up just a process, which we've done in several other locations, for reviewing, revisiting, and updating policies and procedures on an ongoing basis. So it's just sort of institutionalize a process for doing that. Second step in that is prioritizing what policies and procedures most need to be updated. And then third, helping to get that process started. So it's a reasonably sized budget item in the grand scheme of this budget. For the particular activity in what we do for other cities, it's a relatively small dollar amount, but I think that that's a really important piece for the city to be working on, and we want to sort of get that going, so that, and then it can have its own momentum in life after that. The 5th item, performance measures update. So that's one, I want to address that sort of from 2 perspectives. On one hand, that's a carryover from in essence, a year ago when we took our initial cut at performance measures. We'd always talked about, well, when the strategic plan is updated, that we would revisit that to make sure that the measures that are intended to be used at a strategic level, at a senior management team, at an audit committee, at a board level, were those that are aligned with what's in the strategic plan. And so that is reflected in this activity. But in addition to that, the city is also looking at ICMA, International City County Management Association, who is a very deep source of performance metrics. They collect data. We've used their data many times before across the U.S. as a source of, I don't know if the right way to say is a replacement for active strategies, but I'll say for the sake of argument. But what that would give the city in terms of a tool to deal with performance metrics is not just the metrics, but this wealth of data from other municipalities across the U.S. to compare to be able to benchmark, where active strategies is just a tool for your own data. This is also a tool for comparing to others. I think that there are certainly ways that we can help bridge those two things, what's in the strategic plan with what ICMA offers. We happen to be helping another city where we're the internal auditor do just that. But I think what I'd like to suggest here is that we have a discussion after this meeting with the city manager's office, put our heads together on what, if anything, we can do to be most helpful to the city in this regard that makes highest and best use of these dollars, if any, towards this activity, and have that something that we come back to the audit committee on and sort of table that for further discussion. And then I'll just mention the last two items, and then I'll be quiet for a little bit so you can ask questions. So the ongoing internal auditor services, that's just our time for meetings, audit tracking. That's the same number we've had. The fraud, waste, and abuse program coordination. So we've dialed that back a little bit. It was 10,000 this current fiscal year. We're not going to utilize half of that this year, including having done training. And so we're continuing to try to sort of right-size that. I'm sure as soon as, we reduce it, something will happen and we'll need more. But, we're trying to adjust to the market. And so we have cut that in half from 10,000 down to 5,000 in a way sort of magically to get to our 110,000, which we're trying to back into anyway. But those are the projects that make up our recommended program. And again, just to sort of recap, heavy on the internal controls focus, as in essence was anticipated, I would say, because internal controls was a focus at an enterprise level this fiscal year, and this is sort of things that we've learned from that and want to delve deeper. And I think discussion that we had as sort of as a group that would be likely happening this fiscal year. So with that, questions?
So I guess what we're saying then is the performance measures update at this point, that's a tentative budget of 15,000 that
Yes.
After your conversations with staff, you'll come back and decide if any of that or all of it is going to be needed for you to help them implement. I think one of the things that we want to see here is an implementation of these performance measures. In the past, the city's been working with active strategies, and now we're trying to put something that's really usable, come up with those metrics, tie it with the strategic budget and all of that. So I'm thinking that we're at the point where I would like to see that this year we see the actual results of all that work. And so that $15,000 budget, we may need it, we may not, because the city may be at a point where they're able to come up with these measures at this point. Is that correct? And
that's correct. And actually, one of the things that I did this morning as we were flying here, it was going through, and we'll go through the strategic plan, and I could have just waited for that, but that agenda item. The metrics that are in the strategic plan, and this is what we're encountering with our other client who are sort of going through the same process, I believe the majority of those aren't going to be metrics that, for example, ICMA supports, because ICMA is, and that's not a negative comment towards the ICMA, is that they're just much more operational and tactically focused, sort of at a department level. And so I went through and just, even though we could answer this question probably in a couple of weeks, because we have to do that for our other client, is you'll see that the measures appropriately in the strategic plan are more strategic in nature. For example, I don't know, might have been business tax revenue increase. That's not going to be something that's in ICMA. They're going to be looking at, cost per FTE, cost per lane mile maintained, things like that. And the only reason I mention that is one of the things that we'll collectively have to sort of address is if the city moves towards ICMA, what we'll just need to figure out is what do we do about the metrics that ICMA doesn't support because they don't collect data on that. And that's not a bad thing. It's just it's a thing that we're going to have to deal with. There'll be a gap, and that's with our other client. We're doing that and figuring out how do we address the gap because they did the exact same thing. New strategic plan, metrics in it. They're going to be metrics that ICMA doesn't support. They only, I believe, accommodate 10 custom metrics. So what do you do? But what do you do is just relative to how is ICMA as a tool being used to convey this information? You can have an overlay of it that addresses this other stuff. So it could just be a logistical, mechanical thing, but it's something that needs to be thought through. Anyway.
I'll just comment on that. So right now, if we left the $15,000 just as a placeholder, because the current budget's $110,000, so what we would be recommending would be just not this project yet. So that could leave the $15,000 to come back, because my concern is you've got it in your work plan to do it in October through December. So that's really the reason I wanted to pull this item and not go forward at this point in time, is to give the city and the Board of Supervisors an opportunity to even determine if what we're going to replace active strategies with. And so I just think it's premature to spend this money when we haven't decided yet where we're going in the performance indicator methodology. So again, just for the board, it's not that we're not interested in performance indicators. It's a timing and the usefulness of the dollars and having these be as effective as they can be. So since this was in your work plan for October, I just didn't see that as beneficial or a good timing method. So I'm in concurrence with pulling that $15,000 out for a future discussion. And then just as a general question with Dan too, that the payroll testing and the P-card testing and some of the cash testing, payroll, you're going to do, 30, 40 some odd transactions each year anyway. Are you talking about doing a more in-depth type of testing than what the external auditor would be seeing in the payroll?
So I would say for external audits, Kim Cook, Moss Adams, sorry. For external audits, because I've kind of worked on both sides, and so I would say for external audits, they're making sure there's controls in place to express an opinion on the financial statements. For internal audits, we're looking at the policies and procedures that the city has in place and comparing what they're actually doing to those policies and procedures. And so looking a little more in depth on where they need to make sure they're following those policies and procedures and that sort of thing. So it's similar, but more in depth.
Does that mean you concur? Okay. Again, my objective is we don't spend money twice. So what I'm looking to try to make sure is that whatever we're asking the internal auditor to go forward and do does not overlap with what the external auditor does, because I want to get the best bang for all dollars, I guess is what I'm after here. So,
and I guess just as another comment, we use the internal control testing as more of an efficiency approach in our audit to be able to rely on the internal controls to do less audit work over salaries expense on the back end. So it's a way to do our audit more efficiently versus the policies and procedures piece that they do. So.
This plan seems to pretty good to me relative to being based on the internal control review you did. And as I remember my review of those internal control issues, there are lots more in other areas. Would you say that there would be other audits out of the internal control arena next year also? Different areas?
Sure. So if this was a larger budget, which I'm not pining for, in essence, each of the areas that we had audit findings, we could do work. I think that would be beneficial, but we need to be judicious of the dollars here to work with. So we're trying to focus on some areas where we think are prudent to do. I'll give you an example. Accounts receivable. Everywhere we work, they're relatively decentralized. Difficult to put your finger on what's AR outstanding across an organization. Good opportunity, even good opportunity for collecting dollars. But so yes, I could see in future years doing that, either through doing a more in-depth audit in the area, just doing some testing like we're doing here, and really what we're trying to do is just sort of get as much bang for the buck and cover as many things as we can. But yes, to your point, there are other areas we certainly could.
Relating this to Supervisor Bagwell's comment, I would think then you had 2 or 3 other audits or testing processes available to include as an alternative to the performance measures issue. And that performance measure issue could then be scheduled for another year down the road.
That's possible, certainly.
I don't know, would it be inappropriate to maybe incorporate 1 or 2? It sounds like the Board of Supervisors might like something a little more definite.
Go ahead.
I don't mind. Again, I'm only speaking for myself, so I want to make that clear because we haven't had any other discussion with any other board members. But I really think we should leave the $15,000 available. I think that we could come back in 3 months and know whether we want to pick up the performance indicators or whether there's another area that even there may be an area that staff itself knows that they need to get some help. Yeah. And so I don't think it's wrong to actually find out and say, wow, gosh, glad they asked us, because we could really use help in implementing X. So one of the areas for me is contracts, and we're going to have a new employee. So it might be that the board feels contracts is an area we could benefit with somebody taking the lead because staff is overwhelmed with work. And like you said, maybe that's part of the policies and procedures, but maybe it's better to put 15,000 up there and make it 50 and really concentrate on areas that will benefit the city as an entire organization. So that's really my thought, is to kind of give us a little bit of time to determine the value of where that 15,000 could be placed.
Yeah, and I concur. I mean, I think we could just treat it like we have what, a program for 95,000. We have 15 in contingency, and which we have done before. We had a placeholder, and the reason we left performance measures is that's been something that's been important to the audit committee. So we didn't want to sort of just cast it aside. Have the discussion with the city manager's office. Figure out, is this prudent use of dollars within this fiscal year period? If not, we can come back and find out. There are lots of things we could do, including just doing more work on the policies and procedures or looking at a different area for testing. But I don't think we need to be in any rush to figure that out.
Don Leonard, one of the areas that I found interesting in here was grants management. At one of the last supervisors meetings, the Health and Human Services group was there, and looked like they're all supported just by grants. and there was concern about what happens when a grant goes away. That might be one area we want to look at. And there's not a lot of money there, but the possibility of problems, I think, is pretty big.
Okay, if there are no more comments, we'll close this, but I just, as a final comment, I'd like to say that, as I said earlier, we want to make sure that we are getting the performance measures tied out to the budget, and so if that's being taken care of without us having to spend an extra $15,000 or all of that, that's fine. But we are having as a placeholder to find out what really needs to be done, and we'll be looking at you to report back to us in the next committee meeting.
We need a motion.
What do I need a motion for? Motion for what?
To recommend.
Oh, no, that's right.
Okay.
Okay. Is there a motion for? Yeah, I hate this motion. Is there a motion for to accept the work plan and make a recommendation to the Board of Supervisors?
I so move.
Moving the 15,000 to contingency from the performance measure? That'll be contingency.
Yes, that will be my motion.
Okay, if you want to restate that motion with the contingency in there,
Okay, I move that the Audit Committee recommend to the Board of Supervisors adoption of the FY16, 15-16 internal audit plan with the one revision replacing performance measures update with a placeholder contingency.
I'll second that.
all those in favor say aye.
Aye.
All those opposed, motion carries. Okay, agenda item number 10. At this time, Moss Adams will be providing an update on the strategic plan and how we're doing on the dashboards and everything else, so I'll give it to you, Mark.
Okay. So you should have in your packet a strategic plan, first page, the big seal of Carson City on it. You have that? So this plan was approved, sorry, Nick, by the board, May 21st, does that sound right? The board adopted the strategic plan? No. What's this month? Something like that. I don't know. Last month, how about that? I guess I could ask you, Lori?
The last Thursday board meeting.
There you go, whatever date that was. So here's what I wanted to share with you, because you have not seen this before. And actually, I was going to make a few comments and then maybe turn it over to you, Lori, and see if there's anything you want to add about the process, the outcome, whatever. So just, and of course you can say no, but give you a minute to think if there's anything you want to share. So I'd like to direct you to the page 6, which has got a little pyramid at the bottom of it, and talk to you about a few things. So this plan has 3 primary components. It has, well, besides the mission and vision and values, which are on page 6, strategic goals, strategic objectives, and then performance measures align with those. And the process that the city went through to develop this plan, which we had the good fortune to help facilitate, was a couple of work sessions with the management team. First, focused on goals. Later, had a work session focused on objectives and strategies, which were then brought to the board in a retreat format of board with the management team, and they reviewed all of that, so that in essence the board had the opportunity to get the benefit of what management was recommending to them in terms of goals and objectives. The board could put their sort of stamp on that of what they thought was important, what should be there, what should not be there. Then that went to a couple open houses that the public had an opportunity to comment on. There was a survey that was administered online and in hard copy at the open houses for the public. So it was posted on the website, for example, and the management. There were well over 200 responses to the survey, which is a lot. I mean, it's not a big number, but it's a lot in local government terms. A few dozen is usually good. So that was a great response. There was at least one goal that was added as a result of the public input, which is great. So process kind of worked. So what you see on the bottom of page 6 sort of depicted is what this plan covers. Vision, the first 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 sort of rows of the pyramid or layers, the vision, mission, values, the strategic goals, strategic objectives, citywide performance measures. What you can kind of expect is that each of your departments are developing in some way, shape, or form a plan for operating their department that should have alignment with this plan, right? Because this is the guidance now of what the city's trying to achieve at a strategic level. If you were to turn to pages 8 and 9, and this isn't in booklet format, but it's laid out so that on the left side are the goals and objectives and strategies, and on the right side you have the performance measures. And each section has that, a series of goals and objectives. So like for economic development on page 8, goal is to cultivate a vibrant, diverse, and dynamic economy that attracts and retains businesses and a skilled workforce. You have 1, 2, 3, 4 objectives. First one, cultivate regional partnerships. Under each objective, you have strategies. So that's the structure. And then on page 9, the complementary piece of that are the performance measures. So for example, total jobs created. I don't think ICMA is collecting data. They might. I shouldn't presuppose, but they may not be collecting data on total jobs created for each city on a fiscal year. Percent increase in business tax base, probably not collecting that. And so, again, not a detrimental comment to ICMA, but it's just, okay, so then how do we collect that information for the city? And I mean we, the collective, not us necessarily. What are the data sources? How is that prepared, and how is that presented on an ongoing basis for the benefit of senior management, audit committee, board, so that you sort of have a finger on the pulse of the progress of the city towards the things that are important, that are reflected in the strategic plan. So anyway, this is the plan. This is what came out of the process. We've, I guess, kind of been dangling this in front of you for a while, saying, you know, we needed the board to be able to receive and adopt this first before we shared it. I think that's kind of all I have to comment on it. I don't know if Lori, there's anything that you want to add to that, or questions from the
Actually,
committee?
I think Mark gave a pretty good flavor of the process and everything, and I will just say participating in it was interesting, and it's probably a little more difficult than people think. When you have to just sit down and really decide who are we, what are we, where do we want to go, that's not quite as easy as it sounds, you know. So I really appreciated everyone that worked so hard on it, and that we did take it seriously. And as you indicated, we actually changed the plan and the strategic goals based on public input. So I think that impressed me the most, is that the public was able to come forward and give us some recommendations that they didn't sit through all the hours that we did. They came to a public workshop and saw something immediately and could give us some feedback. So it was a good process.
So it looks like here that we pretty much identified our performance measures. Correct. So we really have our dashboard, in a sense. And then there's, underneath this, there'll be more. So I guess what we're going to be looking at here in the next few months is seeing where we get a report or something. The city's developing that, or somebody's putting that together, where we're going to see these measures and how they're tying with the budget and how it's performing. And there's sub performance indicators under this that I guess different departments or people working with it would then manage themselves.
Sure, yeah, so again, think of this as 2 layers. This is the enterprise level of the organization. Absolutely, your city manager, I'm sure, is going to be interested in each department having metrics, perhaps many metrics that they're tracking from an operational standpoint, some of which will directly relate to this and some will be indirectly relate to this. Relative to the dashboard, if you can sort of hearken back to what we developed before, you know, we had the green, yellow, red, but that was based on a 3-year historical. So yes, we have the measures now, what we want to measure based on the strategic plan. So for example, what was intended in the line item for performance measures for this upcoming year was, okay, so where does the information come from to support each of these measures? Some of it, I'm sure, will be readily available in the city. Some of it might be a little bit painful to create. And so where does each data source come from in the city? How do we make sure it's updated? And then create what I would consider sort of the first dashboard is, can we create, like what we did before, a 3-year historical so that we can now paint a picture. Where are we today? Where have we been? And then you're in a position to look going forward. Are we making progress along the continuum that we want to?
I think you could actually look at it as we've completed the first 5 rungs of the pyramid, but we yet have the bottom 2, which is the departmental strategic plan and the departmental performance
Right.
measures. And I think that's really why I wanted to hold off on the performance measures, is to grab the departmental at the same time and then maybe look at, and potentially what I'm looking at is you would be auditing the performance indicators next year, saying all of the points are valid, all of them are from proper sources, and we can replicate the results. I think often that's what happens in performance indicators is when you audit them, you can't replicate the results, and therefore you don't know whether it's valid or not. And so I think that's what I look at as an internal auditor, is coming back, not developing them in the first place, but auditing that the results are accurate and documented, I guess is the right word for that.
Now, your discussion earlier about the different tactical versus strategic, whether the sources of information, I don't remember the acronym, but ITMA. C. And so this is what's going to be discussed in the next few weeks, trying to work through which process to go with?
I think just discuss what's the city's strategy towards this, and is there a place for us to be able to help in the formulation of that strategy and putting this in place? And all we're saying is, coming into this meeting, it was predicated on what our discussions have been previously. We want to layer in what the city manager is thinking moving forward and see if there's an alignment for us to be able to help, or that can just take its own course. I think what the chair is just saying is we don't want that to languish, right,
Okay.
from an audit committee perspective.
So if there are no more comments, it's a non-action item, so there's nothing. Is there any more comments on that, or?
Nope.
Okay. All right, now we need to schedule our next meeting, and I think from a past meeting, we decided we're going to have one of these meetings in the evening, just to see if it changes the turnout.
We still need to come up with, to approve the recommendation for their contract, right?
No, we already did that, no.
Agendized. We did the work plan.
Yeah.
Yeah, we did the work plan,
So
so.
what about,
It'll be too late. The Board of Supervisors will have to deal with that June 18th.
So what they're going to do is if they accept the audit plan, then they're going to have to come up with who the auditor is, and so, okay.
And I think Nick's just saying that they can handle that without a recommendation, right? Speaking objectively, yeah.
Okay, so as far as our next meeting, I guess what my question is, at what point will Moss Adams have some information, and how far along are we going to be in some of these projects, assuming that the board does accept the contract and moving forward on the projects that you recommended?
So I don't know that there's necessarily a rush to a next meeting. I'm not trying to put it off because we enjoy getting together with you. I think we want to have the benefit of having the discussion with the city manager's office, because assuming things are approved, then we can get going. And if we do, at least based on this schedule, the first item we will have to be able to report back to you on in terms of progress would be the policies and procedures. You know, I feel like I want to say maybe the August timeframe, if that feels about right. I kind of feel July is too early. September might be okay, but I don't want it to make it feel like I'm pushing it off too far. So August or September, and maybe back to you to see what feels kind of right to you.
I think what we could do is we could, I mean, I don't want to get together if there is not that much to discuss, and yet I don't want to wait too long. So if we had a meeting in August, it looks like we'd be just primarily talking about the procedures and policies and what's happening there, as well as after you're talking with staff, what might be happening with the performance measures. Is that correct?
Correct. And I think I honestly feel like September would probably be more worthwhile timeframe.
I'm kind of thinking that too, because even if there was some action we needed to take and some recommendations on what you came up with staff, you wouldn't be working on that till the end of the year anyway, correct?
Well,
the performance.
Yeah, I don't know necessarily when we would be working on it, but we wouldn't be working on it until after that. So, I don't think that that's an issue. I mean, that'll be part of what we come back with is if we're doing anything on it, what's the timing of that? For example, to Lori's point, is it part of something that's happening at a departmental level? Is it part of something that's happening at a citywide level, knowing that the department level is coming? I don't know, but that's what we would come back with. So I think September timeframe.
Okay, well, then
right.
I'm checking my calendar, and everybody, if they've got their calendars, I'm looking at Tuesday, September the 1st. Would that be workable for everyone? Okay.
Wait. No, what's the first Tuesdays is Parks at 5:30? Because were we not looking to have a nighttime?
We were looking at 5:30,
So
right?
this room I know, because I'm in that board, that meeting is the Parks and Rec Commission. So I know Tuesdays at 5:30 on the first one of the month.
You know, I think that's becoming a continual problem, you know. The evenings are making it more difficult sometimes to even be able to get the play.
Well,
I
but
can't
the
do the
8th.
8th.
Oh,
I can't do the 8th. So the next one I could do would be the 15th. How about the 15th? You think we're a bit?
Sorry. What if we went to a Wednesday, like the 9th?
I could do the 9th.
RTC is on the Wednesday.
Okay, sorry.
Good
Okay.
try.
Sorry.
We could do, or we could do Wednesday the 2nd. All Wednesdays are busy.
Okay, maybe that's why we didn't do
Actually, let's
Wednesdays.
ask the recording secretary, what's the open day to the, yeah, what's
Well,
the open day?
How about if we do, then if we do tentatively, you're saying the 1st we can't do, right?
She was going to check her calendar, I think, to see what.
Okay. You're going to check it for us to see what's available? Oh, great.
Let's ask, because the first I have Parks.
Yeah, 1st we can't do, so
First Tuesdays is Parks and Rec.
so we have to look at the 15th then, see if the 15th's available. Otherwise, we'll just go for 3 o'clock again.
Question. I was gonna go to this supervisors meeting, but Mike is gonna be there. Is there an open meeting problem if I show up?
No.
Okay.
I think there is.
I'm operating under the assumption there is.
Of what?
Oh.
He can attend any meeting he wants, they just can't
Oh, but
He can't be
converse.
there, be there
Yeah, I
representing
understand
the
we can't
committee.
be there at all.
That's not true.
Oh,
Well, that's
Adriana,
yeah.
I'm not sure you're catching, they were interested in coming to the Board of Supervisors meeting they're all allowed to attend meetings, they just can't confer as a board and make decisions.
That's correct,
So,
unless you had a joint meeting.
meetings.
So you
Got
could,
that in?
you could sit in the public chair, though, you wouldn't be able to.
Oh, no.
Yeah. Okay. Well, then on September 15th, do we have is that evening clear at 5:30?
That's it.
September 15th, 5:30. Okay, looks like we're on, so.
Commissioner
That's
Bagwell.
a Tuesday, right?
Yeah,
It's
so that'll be
open on my
Tuesday, the
calendar, But I
15th.
don't know if the school board or any other group has.
We'll tentatively do that unless we get notified that somebody beat us to the recording date.
If somebody beats us to it, what I suggest is we just move it to 3 o'clock as usual. And I know that we had a meeting discussion because it was requested we try evening meetings, but it seems like it's becoming difficult. Everybody's doing evening meetings. So we'll just go to 3. So we'll tentatively put down Tuesday, the 15th at 5:30.
And hopefully we'll be able to also discuss the CAFR.
Okay, being that there's no public here, there's no asking for public comment, so at this time, if there's a motion to adjourn the meeting,
Okay.
you have a second? All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Meeting adjourned.